Crises, macroeconomic and financial crises, large events with substantial adverse impacts, potentially on large numbers of people. Because we care so much about the adverse impacts, we have to know more about these crisis events, what causes them, and what the policy response should be. Not only how to soften the blow in the short run, but also the preventative measures. How could we have avoided the crisis in the first place? Yes, it is true that crises sometimes brings about new opportunities. That's an old saying, but macroeconomic and financial crises are painful. GDP drops, lower consumption, high unemployment, and that's why we want to avoid them. Now, we've already talked a bit about the great financial crisis of 2008 and 2009 and its aftermath in the U.S. However, you may have also surmised that this wasn't just the U.S. that suffered during this crisis. It was the whole world, and that's why we called it a global financial crisis. And even though one of the key shocks that brought down the financial crisis, and that was the bankruptcy of Lehman Brothers in September of 2008, was based in the U.S., that shock had macroeconomic and financial implications all over the world. Try to imagine one of the world's most interconnected financial institutions that was indebted to many other such institutions. Those other institutions were depending upon Lehman to service their debt, to pay their obligations, to pay what they owed, and to pay them on schedule. When that didn't happen and couldn't happen, well, you can think of the repercussions in the financial system like a line of dominoes. You tip one domino and boom, 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 all the rest fall down. It's what they call the domino theory. But what happens in financial centers, on Wall Street, in the city in London, in other financial centers, that has also dramatic repercussions for the rest of the economy, for Main Street or High Street or any town throughout the world. Finance matters for microeconomics. And in fact, there are elements of the financial system that can make our macroeconomic multipliers even bigger. For example, when a central bank raises interest rates that have an impact on a financial system, those impacts can be amplified throughout the economy. We have a name for that. We call those financial accelerators. But wait, there's more. Crises have antecedents. Often, and without knowing it, countries, including through their fiscal policies, monetary and exchange rate policies, can be sowing the seeds of crises years before they actually happen. In the case of the latest and great global financial crisis, the seeds were grown to a large degree in the buildup of lending in banks that were related to housing. That happened in the United States, but also in Europe. And they were egged on by lax regulation in the banking system. Financial institutions became even more loose and more liberal in their lending policies. Perhaps you heard of ninja loans. No income, no jobs, no assets. You still get a loan. It shouldn't be any surprise that excessive lending to people who would not be able to pay back, especially when that lending was securitized, it was diced up, and perhaps so that perhaps your mortgage, which originated in your hometown bank, was passed on to many, many banks in little tiny pieces all around the world. All of that excessive lending simply wasn't sustainable. And at the same time, because it was securitized and diced up, people couldn't really tell what was going on. It was very difficult. And as we know, something that's not sustainable is going to end. It's going to end sooner or later. That's what it means to be unsustainable. Now, we did not invent the concept of crises. As the old song goes, we didn't start the fire, okay? Financial crises that have macroeconomic implications are quite an old story. They seem to happen everywhere, both in industrialized countries and also in emerging markets, especially as these countries, we used to call them developing countries, but now they're emerging markets. They become even more integrated into the world economy. In fact, it's the specific flavor of a financial crisis, this specific flavor, that include pressures on the exchange rate and net exports as what I call balance of payments crises that are near and dear to my heart. As I mentioned in an opening video, for most of my professional career, I've worked in the International Monetary Fund, dealing with and preventing these kinds of crises. Putting the fire out or preventing the fire in the first place, that's the bread and butter for an IMF economist like myself. And you can see discussions of such crises, for example, in chapter 13 of your Mankiw book. He discusses Mexico in 1994, and he discusses Asia in 1997-98. These are two such examples, but there's many more. And even as each crisis, each country case study has its own specific aspects, its own country details, there are similarities. In most all of the cases, there are antecedents, stuff that was building up over time, perhaps inappropriate lending, excessive fiscal deficits, or trying in vain to keep an exchange rate at an unrealistic value. This is stuff that can build up over time, and as the old blues singer, Reverend Gary Davis, told us, the doctor said it would kill me, but he wouldn't say when. Then, in many cases, comes the straw that breaks the camel back, that last shock. It could be a political event, including an assassination. Take a look at the Mexico case. It's in there. And it could be that the bottom falls out of the market for our export good. That happened to many oil exporters in recent years. Or it could just be that investors get a wake-up call. Hello, things are not sustainable. You better get out. And they sell off their country assets, and that could spark a crisis too. We'll be looking closely at some cases. And in fact, your memo assignment for this last module asks you to focus on one case study and tell us, where did the country start off? What was the shock that precipitated the crisis? Where were the policies that were used to put the fire out? And what might have been done to prevent the crisis or to keep another such crisis from happening? But enough of me. It's now your time. Let's see you apply all the stuff you've learned. Thank you.